And Ben Betts, a very warm welcome as well for tonight. Ben Betts is the founder of H2 Labs, the founder of the different instruments, Curator LXP, and Learning Locker. And Ben, you will bring us, guide us tonight with your presentation. We will talk tonight about personalized learning, LXP dashboarding, badges, and gamification. Especially the last three were asked by you. Sabrina asked everybody if there were special topics for tonight, and dashboarding, badges, and gamifications in combination of personalized learning was one of them. Just in the big picture, we started the first webinar about personalized learning, just an overall look at the personalized learning. The second one we talked about with Miriam Naylor about self-directed learning and self-regulated learning in combination of personalized learning. And the third webinar we talked about content curation and how can content curation support personalized learning, and we did that with Stephen Walsh. It's 1 hour for tonight till 9 o'clock, and we try to make it an interactive webinar, so you can ask your questions on the right hand side, and I know everybody can see that one, but we have some different kind of questions as well, gathered by either Jooske, that will be the polls, or Ben Betts will guide us with the different kind of questions. So we try to make it more interactive for that. Ben Betts.
Thanks, Francois, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. My Dutch is not so good, so for the conversations, and unless, of course, you don't want me to know what it is you're saying, then I appreciate if you take my ignorance and speak in English for me tonight. Of course, if you don't want me to know, then be Dutch, that's fine. As Francois said, I'm going to touch a little bit around personalized learning, and then the idea of learning experiences, my time spent with gamification, and how we might use data as part of that process. I was asked to give you a small piece of homework before this webinar. Normally, I would not give homework, but I was asked. So before we sent out a video of one of my colleagues, Janet, who I appreciate speaks very quickly. If a sort of mid-American accent is not your normal English accent, but I was interested in her talking you through some results from a survey that we conducted earlier this year. We asked several hundred people in learning and development about the idea of personalized learning, and we got some interesting results back. So one of my tasks, my questions to you was, were there any headlines, any results or any assumptions or any relationships in the data, in the report? And it's only a very short report, and only a very top level summary. Was there anything from that surprised you? So if you have had chance to read that, then do put a comment in the chat with anything that surprised you on text. If anybody wishes to speak, then do unmute yourselves and go. Yvonne asked to begin with, in which countries were the survey conducted? We did it online, so we had responses from all over the place, but mostly around 50% of the response came from Europe, including the UK for the moment until March. Then We had a third or so from North America, and the rest of the world making up the rest. So mostly euros, but then with some from the USA as well. Suzanne said, I found it interesting to hear that people do not like to be pigeonholed. And I think this was interesting to me too, Suzanne, but I think the thing that interested me perhaps more was when you looked at the difference between people who responded as an employee or as a learner and people who responded as a manager of learners. And I kept seeing differences between what managers thought would be really great and what learners thought would be really great. That for me was the biggest surprise when I saw the data to begin with, was that there was a disconnect between people who would be on the receiving end personally of what personalized learning might be and managers of that, whether that was because managers thought it might save them more time or take more load off, take away administration, I'm not sure, but the relationship there was quite interesting. And yeah, I mean, maybe it's not so surprising that one group thinks it's different, but it's, you know, when we talk about personalized learning, and then even within the same context of a question, the audience takes it quite differently. I think Suzanne, yeah, learning many things that these groups have different ideas about. I think that's true. Yvonne, you saw that you were impressed about the autonomy factor. There was one graph that didn't make it into the summary. I'm a bit upset that it didn't, because the one question that we asked that had the most positive response by far from learners was when we asked, how about if we personalize the look and feel of a learning experience? And overwhelmingly, everybody was very positive about that and said they would love that. And this reminded me of websites and portals that we built 5, 10 years ago, where you could customize the homepage, and there used to be iGoogle, I don't know whether it still exists, where you can create your own homepage and things like this. It seems that maybe that has passed. It's not very common these days to see a completely customizable homepage, completely different themes, colors, widgets, and things like this. But even that idea was still very resonant about what personalized learning means for some people. So, you know, I think I guess where I wanted you to go, and it plays on the slide that I think, Francois, you showed this in an earlier webinar, this idea of personalized learning meaning many things and being perhaps a scale. In this case, we've drawn a scale between someone who has the most autonomy, they're just self-directed, they choose, and by virtue of them choosing, it is personal. And at the other end, adaptive learning, where the computer is really choosing for the individual. There's not much control, not much autonomy. And I think maybe the small survey we did showed some of this, showed that, you know, when we asked the question, what is personalized learning, we had quite a varied response. Obviously, the definitions we gave, so we forced this, we didn't allow a free text response really here, but 30% of people said that personalized learning is a scale. And by that, I meant this sort of continuum that, you know, all of these things could mean personalized learning to different people at different times. I think one area that is of interest to us is this middle bit here, these two, 28% and 21% saying that something about adaptation, something about adaptive learning was really what they thought they were getting with personalized learning. So 28% of people said that personalized learning is learning that adapts to the user's preferences. So something maybe explicit there, maybe not. And then 21% says personalized learning always stretches a learner's understanding. But to stretch a learner's understanding, we must know not only the position of the learner today, but also the curriculum, the topic to be taught. That to me sounds a lot like adaptive learning. That sounds like what we would see at the far end of the scale of this, sort of the least autonomy. And to do that is quite technically complex. I've seen a number of quite large startups The one that comes to the front of my mind is a US company called Newton, who we don't hear so much from anymore. But 5 years ago, they were very much the revolutionary in personalized learning, and they were creating an adaptive platform that changed the challenge, the level of difficulty of questions and of content based on the learner's progress. But it turns out that's really difficult. And it turns out that it's very difficult to map all of the different curriculums and things like that into that sort of sequence. So I think they still exist, they still do this, but I don't hear so much about adaptive learning as I did a few years ago. So maybe that's becoming too difficult. And just saying a quick chat there, people still feel treated personally even though you work as a large group. And things like this. So yes, I think the actual amount of effort you need to go to show that something is personalized, even from just the browser saying welcome back, Yotsky, or something like this. This is elements of personalization that creep in and make it feel more personalized than other things. I don't know about other tools, but it's very common that people try for a level of adaptation, but whether it's the sort of level that we were aspiring to a few years ago was very machine learning orientated, that things would be organic and that the computer would potentially know how it could present the next best challenge to you. And instead, we've ended up being very rules-based, so that it is possible to adapt the learning based on your level of mastery, but it takes an intense amount of work to set up and to make it applicable for more than one knowledge area, more than one domain. Is quite tough. AI is being used to do it, but in limited success. You see very narrow success in AI and this area. So instead of building a teaching machine, you see elements of recommendation is more where we see AI creeping in, being less certain that this is the right thing, but recommending that. And I'll talk about that a bit tonight. My first poll for you tonight comes with this slide about why we should bother personalizing. And forgive me if this treads over ground that you've covered elsewhere, but I think it's important that we understand the rationale for personalization. We asked this question, or a question like it, examples of this in normal e-learning, where you take a pretest and then maybe you can skip a significant period of content or something like that. Maybe that comes back to saving time or to saving learners' time. That's certainly a big thing for a lot of customers. My company creates software that we sell into corporate organizations around the world. Saving learners time to get the same result is something that I hear quite a lot about. If we can limit the amount of content, take content away, and take away the time that somebody needs for certain activities, then perhaps this would be a really big benefit of personalized learning. Of course, that might not be your context. Your context might be that the journey is more important than saving time. We have a few people also voting for increasing engagement between learners and learning. And I think this is interesting. I have a point to make around engagement in a moment, which you might not agree with. But I think this is interesting. Thank you. Could I switch back to the slide view?
Sure. Take some time.
It's okay? Ooh,
Yeah, it's okay, but it's the bandwidth. Maybe we should indeed close some of the webcams. Well, it's coming.
Okay. I just shut mine off a moment in case maybe.
Yeah, I'll also shut mine off.
So when we put out the poll, the question that we ask is, which of the following benefits do you anticipate gaining as a result of using more personalized tools for learning? 72% thought make learners feel more in control. So we come back to autonomy, maybe again, that actually this could be this, but there was quite a split here. People who could vote for more than one answer in my original poll. Sharing relevant, useful content, just-in-time learning interventions, and enabling learners to deepen their level of understanding. So I think maybe tonight we've been quite reflective of the poll that we put out previously, of the survey we put out there, that actually about control is probably the #1 thing. which is good because my particular interest is probably at this end of the scale. So if we have this continuum along which we can personalize learning, one end driven by computers, and don't get me wrong, I am a massive geek. So I always turn to computers and the technology solution wherever is possible. But in this circumstance, I'm actually a little bit more interested in personalization driven by people. My rationale. Can you hear me okay still?
Yes, yes.
Sorry.
I tried to restart the presentation, but I don't know why it's so slow. Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Do text if anybody has a problem. If I'm going too fast or my audio cuts out, just write in the box.
Yeah.
My personal rationalization for why I think empowering more self-directed learning is important is probably one that you'd be familiar with if you follow the last couple of years' trends of what people are saying around the idea of the fourth industrial revolution, that learning and working, and that is my context is mostly workplace learning, is changing radically, and that the workplace of the future will rely on a different set of skills to the skills that we have developed to date. And this will be a radical departure even from the computing era that we're in today, to think about the role that intelligence and automation will play in our workforce of tomorrow. You look at reports, this one is from McKinsey, McKinsey Automation and the Future of Work. There's a horrible URL there, which I'm sure we give you the slide deck afterwards to avoid you trying to make a note of this. But Automation and the Future of the Workforce is quite a detailed report from McKinsey, where they try to understand where hours will be spent, amongst other things, which skills will be the most important in the future and which are growing. And this is this top corner here, where McKinsey is suggesting that skills such as leadership, communication, critical thinking, social and emotional skills will remain important and remain in demand and will grow even through the onset of the fourth industrial revolution, the onset of intelligence and AI in the workplace and automation. These sorts of skills, these social emotional skills, will remain, as will some higher cognitive skills like critical thinking. We do see some more technological skills here. Advanced IT, for example, is coming into this section. But the pace at which IT advances and digital skills develop means it's going to be very difficult for us in learning and development to always create and map the perfect piece of learning content for someone. The rate of change in technology is so great that it's very difficult to stay ahead of the technology, to sort of understand the technology as teachers, as tutors, to be able to create a learning experience based around that technology and have it stay relevant for any period of time is so difficult that we can think that we can actually stay ahead here. So actually, I think this is important for us in learning, thinking about how will we deliver learning in the future, and the answer must be that we focus not on basic skills, or on basic data input, on basic cognitive skills, but we think about social and emotional things, which are very self-directed. One must be quite intrinsically motivated. One must want to think more about leadership, communication, and negotiation, for example, to push the skill over. So I think we're about to enter the age of self-directed learning, which unfortunately will mean that we will see an awful lot of buzzwords in the next few years about self-directed, self-managed, and things like this. This is not a new concept, obviously, but I think it's becoming increasingly obvious, and I know you've already talked about this. I think that the sort of workplace learning, as we've seen it through the 1950s, out of World War II, through the 1950s, through the 1990s, was very much a question of training management. You will learn this. You will learn that. Learning objectives were a very strong part of it, and they remain today. Of course, today, now I see much more focus in workplace learning on almost begging people to learn. So where previously we just stood at the front of the classroom and said, today you will learn this. Now I see much more example of us being desperately saying, oh, please, why won't you learn? Please, if I make it more sexy, if I give you more points, if I give you more VR, then maybe this will engage you. And I think that's a symptom of managing learning, of us trying to put people across into a learning context and saying, please, why won't you learn? And I think the reality that is dawning on us now, and that is already here for a lot of people, it is not a 2020 plus thing, is that actually people like yourselves are only making progress in your careers, in your workplaces, because you're learning all the time. Because learning is just something that happens in the flow of work. And so I think we start to realize this as learning and development professionals, that we're entering the age of self-directed learning. And at this point, everything changes for personalization, because it's no longer about creating the perfect piece of content and trying to deliver it to them. It's trying to think about how can we motivate people to be more self-directed? How can we let people, how can we guide people from saying that learning is something that happened to them, something that we taught in a classroom, you will turn up, you will do this, to something that they consume by themselves? How can we motivate people to become more self-directed in learning? This is one of my favorite topics in terms of motivation and how we can get people to be more self-directed. And I use this theory, self-determination theory, quite regularly. This is a theory by two social psychologists from the USA called DC and Ryan. And they talked about, well, they didn't quite talk about these three things, but they talked about the idea of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That these three levers must be present for us to become motivated intrinsically for an activity, for us to want to do something. So how can we get learners to want to become more self-directed, to want to take on more personalized challenges like this? Autonomy, mastery, and purpose, they said, were the three levers. Well, actually, they called them autonomy, competence, and relatedness. But there's a book by a chap called Daniel Pink, Dan Pink, and his book Drive, that renamed them autonomy, mastery, purpose, became very famous. You may well have seen the book. It's a very well-read, very best-selling book by Dan Pink around autonomy, mastery, purpose. Yeah, there's a really nice book. Yoski, is it the one with the animation?
Yes,
maybe
yes.
you should find this.
Yeah, yeah.
Really nice RSA Animate video of this theory. I do encourage you to take a look. I take a little a moment just to dive into each one of these areas and think about what it means for personalized learning and learning experiences. Autonomy, I often give the example of autonomy of this woman. This is a researcher called Ellen Langer, who worked out of the USA in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I think she's still working today. And she did an experiment about control, where her and her research team took over a residential care home, a care home for the elderly in upstate New York. They ran an experiment. And on one floor of the residential care home, the residents got excellent care. No, they got excellent care everywhere. But specifically on this floor, the carers were instructed to do everything for them. They arranged the furniture in their room. They put a plant in the room. They watered it for them. There was a film night which the carers would put on each week. So they had an exceptional level of care where the carers did everything for the individuals on that floor. On the next floor, they did something slightly different, because the third floor, that was the control. That was the standard of care that is expected in the care home, that people are taken care of, that they are looked after. But on the floor above, on the top floor, the fourth floor of the building, Langer and her team made a change. They stopped people caring quite so much. And what they did was they said, you can have whatever furniture you want in your room, but you must take care of your room. You must clean it. You must take care. You can have a plant, but you must water it. You must take care of it. You can do film night, but it's up to you to organize film night. They just gave people a little bit more control. So actually, it was an environment where they thought that was potentially worse care because they weren't being looked after as well. But actually, what they were doing was an experiment on control. What impact did giving a little bit more autonomy give to people on the fourth floor versus people on the third floor? And when the researchers went back after a year, they did a baseline, and then they did a follow-up 12 months later. And sure enough, the residents who had more control generally reported a higher level of well-being. They were happier. But more remarkably, they seemed to live longer. When you control for everything else that was going on, people on the fourth floor were outliving people on the third floor. A little bit of control and autonomy, even a tiny amount, seemed to make a fundamental difference. And I think this is an area we can learn from. How can we give a little bit of control back to learners? And so going back to my survey again at this point, thinking about what it is they want, overwhelmingly we saw that the ability to define and follow your own learning path was really well received from everybody. And this, I think, should be a feature of personalized learning. The ability for somebody to choose their path through something really does seem to be very popular. And maybe it also plays to this idea of autonomy. But then we start thinking about, that's quite a lot of choice. If we just say, hey, look, you can do anything, you can go on any learning path, then we're not really doing our job as teachers, as instructional designers. That's just kind of letting people browse the internet. So it's quite a difficult balance here. When we asked people, should we then give you suggested content based on assumptions about the person? Maybe that they were male, that they were female, that they were senior, that they were junior, that they were from Europe, that they were from North America. We saw a more negative response to this, that people didn't like content suggestions based on assumptions around them. And so my next poll for you is this. Would you rather that a machine tells you what you want, or that the machine just assumes this, or that you choose for yourself? So would you want to tell the machine what you explicitly want? When you log on for a personalized learning journey, would you want to go through a complete questionnaire that said, I want to see this, I don't want to see this, I want to see that, I don't want to see that? You have to tell it explicitly. Or would you rather that the machine assumes what it is you want based on data about you? Data that either you create as you browse, maybe like Google does, it's tracking what you're doing and it's customizing things. Or actually, should the machine stay away? You should always just choose for yourself. So not an easy question, this. I repeat it again. If you were thinking about a personalized learning experience, would you want to tell a machine explicitly what you wanted? Would you want the machine to just interpret what it is you wanted, to assume things? Or would you want the machine to stay well out of it? And actually, you just want the choice of everything, and you choose for yourself. Just letting a few of the votes come in. So only a few people want to tell the machine explicitly what they want. But maybe you get a nice result, but maybe it's a little bit of work. And then there's quite an interesting split between the rest of us, with many people saying that actually we'll let the machine assume what I want from the data that's there, and others saying, no, I will always just choose for myself. This is quite interesting. And actually, I think this is an area that I'd like to debate a little bit next. And I'm very happy for this next bit if we wanted to unmute yourself and to have some ideas over audio. You don't just have to do the chat. I have a discussion point for you here, because I think this is one of our key challenges in granting people autonomy. Can I just flick back to the slide deck a second, Jotski?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hope it works now immediately. Yeah.
Perfect. I think it's clear to me that we must strike a choice, a balance between unlimited choice and autonomy. So on one hand, unlimited choice is not particularly useful, and it's perhaps a dereliction of duty in terms of tutors. So if we just say, hey, look, I've developed a personalized learning experience for you. It's called the internet. Go choose whatever you want. You can do whatever learning path you want. To me, this feels like unlimited choice is not useful. That's not really the role of a tutor, of a curator, of a learning and development professional. So we must do more than this. Unlimited choice is not useful for people. It fundamentally means that they can't move forward. this is surely the role of a teacher, to give limited choice. But if we give limited choice, then do we prevent people from having the autonomy they need to do as they want? So self-directed learning, I'm thinking about here in terms of this balance between what should the tutor, what should the teacher do, what should the student do? How can we achieve a good balance between unlimited choice and no control? Any thoughts? Just going to wait a moment. There's a few people typing. So Barend says, make limited choice clear so they can choose autonomously for what suits their needs best. So Barend, am I reading this correctly, that you narrow the choice, but you still give a choice? So instead of saying you should do this one thing, we say choose from these 5 things. Yeah, and Hans, maybe a similar routine, that we have to create the boundaries, that we have to say that there is, there is autonomy, but there is bounded autonomy. Suzanne, no answer really, but I agree that there is a role for a tutor and that the learner does not always know what they need to see, learn, or do. Yeah, I think this is, I've often wondered, as somebody who's been an instructional designer, whether, Suzanne, sometimes I have all the fun. Because if somebody says, oh, can you put together a lesson or a training for me on this, then it's actually, in the process of putting together that training, I learn a lot. I learn a lot about some very bizarre, different subject matters over the years. And it's only as a result of putting together the training that I do that. And then I kind of reflect on that and I think, well, that would have been a really good learning experience for the individual at that point. So maybe sometimes the teachers have all the fun. Yvonne, start from limited choice, but open doors to more other directions. Barend, I have one choice for you. If you want to go, if you want something else, go elsewhere. Yeah, this is interesting as well. Maybe that is a more adult learning focus. If you're getting into the higher levels of learning, then we make a recommendation. Maybe you can find something better. Maybe you contribute that back. So I thank you for your participation there. I think this is the way that we've decided to do this is from a technology point of view. With my tools and my platform is pretty much the answer you've got to, which I think is perhaps the obvious one, is that we take a look at recommendation technology. That actually, if we can consume different sources of content and different ideas, so maybe content from the web, content from an organization, content from a library like LinkedIn or something like this, then maybe we can make a recommendation that these 5 areas or these 10 things might be useful to you. And then we allow the individual to choose for them. But there are other technologies. We work, for instance, with a company called Filtered, who are trying to make it even narrower, who are trying to say this is the next best piece of content. And I think that's interesting. I'm not sure that it's right in all contexts, but trying to say that this is actually the most appropriate thing for you. This is what you need next. There are a number of tools that you should perhaps be familiar with in AI and things like this, where that really is the goal, to try and create the best possible learning recommendation. So I think I use technology as a bridge. Technology to give limited choice, and then personalization, self-direction to give autonomy, this thing. Elizabeth says, I think it's important to let people learn things that they wouldn't think of for themselves. Yeah, I also think this is perhaps a problem with my recommendation technology, is that even if I recommend a broad set of things and then allow the person to choose, the AI or the technology that you use there can be quite dangerous in limiting serendipity. It's the idea that you never make it past the first page of Google or something like this. Well, is that because it's the best result? Sometimes, yes. but sometimes maybe you miss connections. I often find as a learning professional that I get the most insight from attending conferences, unfortunately not like this one tonight, but from things totally different, in a totally different field. And maybe a recommendation engine would never make that. So I think there's sort of things like this will go there. Andrea asks, is there a difference between higher educated learners and learners in vocational education, or how much autonomy will help them in learning? I think that's an interesting challenge, and I'm not an expert, Andrea, here, but one of the things I would just flick back to is, if it's still there, I flick back to this slide from McKinsey and say that, you know, you look at things like craft and technician or gross motor skills or other things that maybe you would associate traditionally with vocational education. And I wonder that some of those skills might be becoming the ones that will become less in demand in an automated AI-driven workplace. So I think we have to look quite hard at about what we consider to be a vocational skill, and that maybe vocational skills will merge somewhat with skills that we might have thought to be higher cognitive sort of things. I think this is quite difficult as a mix here. I don't know the answer for that, but I think it's quite an interesting area to think about. Andrea, I'll let you come back, and I will come back on your comment. Just moving us forward a little moment, if I might. The first area was about autonomy, and so for me, in enabling more personalized, self-directed learning, I'm interested in tools like recommendation engines that will give a bounded choice and then allowing the individual to make a final decision. The data there, Francois, is very wide-ranging. Some data is about pattern recognition and about patterns of people like you going through different things. Some of it is about the content itself and basic tagging and taxonomy and the relationships that are there. I'll find out a paper from my partners in this, Filtered, and how they do it and give it to the group, because it's quite an interesting but often secret technology. And it's quite dangerous to sort of know that, you know, we don't really know how some of these things are working. Even when they've been designed, if you have a true machine learning, a true neural network behind it, we're not really sure how it's making the associations in most cases. My second point on self-directed learning was about mastery. It was about how we get better at something that matters to us. And you may be familiar with this model. This is the Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi model of flow, the idea of somebody being in perfect balance between the skill and the challenge. At this point, we addressed this, my company and my idea was to address this using gamification. So we talk about gamification for the first time tonight, thinking that actually, how can we help people stay in this flow channel between skill and challenge? And my idea was that this is something that games do really well. And so actually, maybe elements of gamification in personalization could actually help people to achieve mastery. That how will someone who is a self-directed learner know that they're getting better at something? This is quite difficult. We don't necessarily have the feedback when we're just self-directed and on our own. How do we get the feedback that we're actually progressing in something that matters? And this is something that that we addressed with our platform Curator a little bit, only a little bit, with the ideas of points and badges, and that there would be some autonomy within an area. So in this case, we have some recommendations. You can choose from any of these 5 things, but you can do these things in any order. And then the level of participation that you present there might progress you along a path towards mastery and getting better at something. This was a very effective method of using gamification to get people participating. So, for example, I take one of my examples is a company called AstraZeneca that we work with a lot. And using this model of gamification, we can get a lot of contribution, a lot of autonomous self-directed learners writing back and being given a voice. Over 200,000 contributions in that one organization alone. But it's still very focused on content. This idea that actually everything in a personalized learning journey should be about content, should be about delivering the right content at the right time at the right person. So even my Curator model here is all about consuming content and then commenting back on it. but we know that learning comes from a lot of different experiences. So I wonder whether we should be gamifying learning experiences more than we should be gamifying content. A little question for you here, just to keep us awake as we go into the evening. We know that learning comes from many different experiences. With self-directed learning and personalized learning as we think about it today, are we still too focused on delivering content? Should we focus on things that are not content for self-directed learning? And what might that look like? I'm just going to read Andrea's comment whilst you have a think about this. So, Andrea, you say the vocational education, those skills are important, are getting more important. So, as McKinsey say, but I wonder if our students can always reach the level we ask from them. I don't know. It's quite an interesting dilemma, Andrea, and one that we will have to face up to as a human resource initiative or educators. What is the role of different people in a society where we have complete automation? Very process-driven jobs or things like that may become very automated. Hopefully, maybe we look towards more artisan and craft areas where people who aren't necessarily employed in sort of insight-driven service industries can have a great role going forwards. But it's quite a danger at the moment. I don't know the answer to this, and I think we have a difficult future there, perhaps. So this particular question, are we still too focused on delivering content? If we're asking someone to become a master of something, to improve, to use gamification to help them improve, right now I see a lot of focus of gamification on content. Finish this content, get these points. Is that too narrow a focus, or do we have to go a little bit wider here? Andrea, I'm glad you still struggle with it every day. If you have the answer, you let me know. Marguerite, talking about sharing experiences with each other. Marguerite, you feel that in a social learning context, in reflecting, in mentor or coaching relationships? Can you say a little bit more there? Suzanne, somehow personalized learning also seems to be based on individuals learning when and where and how they can. Certain experiences have to come from games, I guess, rather than from group work or practice. Maybe, or maybe we're gamifying the wrong things. Maybe it's more the gamification of the nudges to say that actually, if you meet with these 3 people, then that's worth points. Those are the sorts of things. Maybe it's actually serendipity we should be gamifying. Maybe we should be less focused on having points for consumption and more focus on making connections, for example. More focus on thinking about how you can gamify things like a mindfulness or a well-being app might. Maybe that might be a future for gamification and personalized learning. Alette, it's a true challenge to balance between providing content and experiential learning. I wish I had more games, time to get content across. I think that's true, Alette. I wonder whether again you might reference the flipped sort of classroom model of providing content in one area and then getting people together to think about experiential learning. Sean, content is much less relevant than learning to design solutions. This will empower the learner to take control of their learning rather than being dependent on the teacher. And content is ubiquitous to a certain extent now, isn't it? Not always good content, but content is everywhere. Suzanne, yes, by games I mean where you can experience something, do something yourself, and then see the train wreck, the assignment. Yeah, I think safe failure is an interesting experience of games and something that maybe VR and AR has a very good opportunity to. But maybe this is the role of the teacher to provide some of those more engaging big picture pieces, and everything else should be down to the learner. We're talking a lot about learning conversations in different groups, and things like this here. So I think this is do keep thinking and contributing. Marguerite, thank you for following up and saying the social and reflective context is how you mean that sharing experience with each other. I'm obviously a big fan of social, and I think this is true here. But I think the next set of personalized learning experiences should really help us move beyond content. To this end, one thing that we're going to start doing in the next version of Curator, a platform some of you may have used or be familiar with, is we're not just going to curate content, but we're going to curate learning experiences. So things like having a conversation with somebody, starting a blog, doing a research project. These are all valid learning experiences that people, we think, can undertake. So we've highlighted an initial 40 experiences, of which I think 3 are to do with content, and the other 37 aren't necessarily content driven. And the idea is that how can we encourage self-directed learners to look beyond content? Because I think at the moment maybe there is a gap. If we ask people to be more self-directed learners, that maybe they think what that means is they must go and find more content, or that maybe we should recommend more content to them. But increasingly, I'm of the opinion that learning experiences are everywhere, and that maybe we need to make it obvious to people. So at this point, we focus more on doing. Berend, you're saying here, focus more on doing there. So this is an interface we're playing with, where the idea is that at the top of the screen, you have this different focus areas. So maybe I focus once on change management, once on coaching, and that within that, I might have I might take a course. I might take a course on leading through change. That's perfectly valid. But I could instantly also watch some videos about how to lead change management. Or I could shadow someone. I could go and follow a team leader who I know is going through a change process right now. And that actually each one of those learning experiences could be perfectly valid in a different context. So this is the sort of dashboard and interface that I'm playing with at the moment to think about how we can give autonomy to learners who are going through a learning journey. Now, of course, we still make some recommendations, because I said that before. So, we have some content, we have got some open content that we will put over, but we'll blend all of those 5,000 or so resources that we've curated alongside the learning experiences of shadowing someone, coaching, mentoring, speaking, going, and then gamify the experience to say that each one of them is valid, and that actually contributing and participating in those things is just as valid as contributing in a piece of content or in an online course. It is less social, Yotsky. You say at this point, this piece is less social explicitly in terms of there's less space to comment. There is still the opportunity for you to go and take a course or to go and get on a webinar and to go and talk to people. But I think it's more trying to encourage people to perhaps get out from behind the keyboard on occasion. And to get to that sort of forcing making of connections, that not everything, I think we can still be social, but not necessarily always online. Curator still has the social elements to it, don't get me wrong. I think those are good and they will stay, but I think there's more to it. So maybe we get out from the keyboard and go in this way. Ren, does this mean you focus on the experiences people have with a learning activity? Yeah. So both, actually, or you build a library of activities. So in my context, I'm going to build a library of activities, but then I'm going to ask people to apply them in different contexts. And that will help me from a data point of view to understand perhaps which learning activities were most relevant to someone who was doing coaching versus someone who was doing change. But because we define the learning activities, we say these are 40 learning activities, and we're quite rigorous. We don't allow anybody to add another one, which may go against autonomy. So I may come unstuck there. But what it does mean is that I get better data and I get a more unified experience, that if we can ask people to apply the same experiences in different contexts, and then we give people the opportunity to say, yes, this was good, no, this was bad, then we can refine those learning activities. So a bit of both, Sibren. We have a library of activities, and then we invite people to do them in different contexts and see which contexts work the best. and things like that, and perhaps to share how a certain video helped them or something like this, absolutely, or something like that. But I think this is the area that I'm personally interested in next, is in learning experiences and how that can go into that pathway for people and things. Final thing I wanted to talk to you today was about purpose. I talked about autonomy and mastery. So maybe autonomy, we have the idea of recommendations, but then giving people choice in the pathway. Mastery, we still like gamification. I still think it's relevant, but maybe we need to gamify beyond just consuming content, gamify beyond completing courses, gamify serendipity, gamify meeting people, getting out and doing things. Maybe that will help achieve mastery. The third lever that Dan Pink and before that the self-determination guys thought about as being something that I could surface through gamification again and badges. That actually, allowing people to demonstrate skills, competencies, and achievements with badges would be a way that they could demonstrate purpose, to say, look, this is what I'm really good at. This is what I can demonstrate to you. But actually, I'm not sure that's enough. I'm not convinced that that's it. So just my third and final discussion question for you tonight is the idea of gamification. Do you think things like badges, points, winning things, whether it's artificial or not, are actually enough to give people purpose? Can gamification be the purpose of itself, or actually do we need something more? At the end of the day, is gamification just a nudge to get people going? Or can I truly get purpose from being top of the leaderboard, to have the most points, to have the right badges? What do you think? So Marguerite says, for some people it helps, depends on his/her personality. Alette, thinking about stories. Alette, say more about your stories. Are you talking about stories that people can tell about their purpose, about how they came to be, about how they tell their story as a basis of they've learned? Baren thinks no, not in the long run. Sibren, purpose is about the reason for yourself to continuously improve. I think so, yes. Suzanne, for me, purpose comes from within, the purpose of the learner. Maybe gamification, Suzanne, is gamification too external to really give purpose, too extrinsic. But then you say badges are visualizations of that, so maybe badges could be, I'm not sure. People need recognition of others who are in authority on that field, says Hans. So maybe peer recognition, being reviewed or being told by someone, being endorsed. Wilma, no, you need experimental time, things like that. Francois, if a badge is connected to competency, which I have to reach, then maybe that gives me purpose. So I keep typing, guys. This is good, great discussion we have here. We only have a few minutes left, but the idea that I think I probably agree with what a few people have said here, that a lot of the gamification artifacts we see today are too external, too extrinsic to really give purpose. But maybe there are few things, maybe badges in certain context where they're awarded maybe by a recognized peer or an authority. If I get Bill Gates to give me the Microsoft badge, then that gives me a bit of purpose. It gives me a bit of something in there. But maybe it's more. Alette talking about stories. So maybe it's actually that purpose through stories is where we get more. Maybe I could badge you for a really good story. So winning points, Baren says, could be an incentive to an extent, but Sean is saying gamification can add fun and enjoyment, which is an important aspect of maintaining connection. So quite, Sean, maybe the whole point of purpose is that I need to reach it. I need to get to the end. And if gamification can help me, then maybe it's part of that. I'll tell you what we've decided to do in this as well. And this might be a little controversial, but maybe not. In this next version of the software that we're going to release with this idea of more personalized self-directed learning, we're just going to ask. So the first question we ask people is, what is it you're trying to achieve in your career right now? And they have three options. Are they trying to improve in their current role? Are they trying to get promoted to get to the next rung on the ladder, or are they trying to pivot to a new career? And then we'll constantly remind them. We say, hey, Francois, you told us that what you were trying to do is to get promoted. So how are you telling that story? And then to that idea, we allow people to tell that story. Sometimes they can showcase badges or quantitative efforts, but most of the time we'll be allowing them to show their story through reflection to show how they've reached that purpose. I've no idea if people will do this. I think this is quite ambitious for workplace learning, which is my focus, to think that people might actually use these sorts of facilities to showcase their purpose this way. I think this is dangerous. I'm not sure, but I think this is the ambition that I see, is that actually I really like the idea that telling a story, maybe having an artificial artifact like a badge will help tell that story. And that maybe some gamification along the way can help me, but gamification in the end will not give me the full purpose that I seek. So I think this is the area that I'm getting to. Hopefully, I seem to be on the same wavelength as most of you guys are. So maybe if I'm wrong, we're all wrong. I'll take some comfort from this. Francois, my friend, has more details on this area. This is part of a new platform we're calling the Curator Learning Experience Platform. You can find more online. We are also running a course, a MOOC, a free MOOC, which maybe it will come to the Dutchies in the not so distant future, about learning experience design and about how you can create learning experiences based on some of these ideas that we've discussed tonight. I'm done talking. I have run out of slides at this point, but you've talked a lot more in the chat, so I'm just going to reflect on that a little bit more. If you have any more parting comments or thoughts, I realized today it's quite theoretical. I've said things today, you know, autonomy, mastery, purpose, things you might have heard before. But hopefully some of the ideas of how we could apply gamification, of data, of recommendations, I think those are the future of personalized learning for me. I think we must have more self-directed learning, and that personalized learning will come as a result of individuals more than computers. That, I guess, is my key takeaway for tonight. So I will go back to reflect on some of the conversation now, but thank you for your time. Joski, Francois, if you have more to add, then please do join me.
Okay, Mehmet, yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, and especially your takeaways you gave tonight in your, well, talking about purpose, mastery, and ownership. It is really good on the different kind of webinars we had before. So again, thank you very much. This is the end of the webinar for tonight. This is the end as well for the 4 different kind of webinars we had. So I really would like to thank you all for being with us in the webinars. Yeah, I think that's it for tonight.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you, Joski. I understand you're having some audio difficulties, but thank you for inviting me.
Oh, the Mestify. Yeah. Yeah, Sabrina, does the environment stay open for everybody, and how long? The environment where all the discussions were during the 4 webinars. Perfect. Well, again, thank you very much, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Right, thank you, Ben. Thank you.